Hello, I'm Libby Motika, and I'd like to welcome you to the final episode in our Mosaic series dedicated to the rich history and challenging recovery of Pacific Palisades. The catastrophic fires in January prompted us to honor the community and lament it from several perspectives. We review the unique history of the Palisades from its founding as a Methodist Chautauqua over a century ago. We recall the colorful traditions, like the 4th of July parade, that made a town a community. We paid tribute to the beloved businesses, now in ruins, after serving generations of grateful customers. And we underscored the vital importance of trees in contributing to the health and beauty of the community, and the determination to bring the urban forest back from devastation. In tonight's episode, we're considering how a community responds to the loss of historically significant places, from vintage homes to legacy businesses. Should the response be a plaque, an art installation, a salvage remnant, an annual event? But whatever physical form the response will take must be found in connecting people with place and rebuilding civic memory. Tonight's program will begin with a presentation by Ken Bernstein, Principal Planner of the City of Los Angeles. Ken will survey the historic properties impacted or spared in the Palisades fire, underscoring the vital role these places play in the revival of a stricken community. Ken will be followed by a pair of special segments exploring the futures of two National Register of Historic Places decimated by the fire, the Palisades Business Block and the Will Rogers Ranch, each requiring different approaches to the recovery process. Randy Young, curator of the Pacific Palisades Historical Society, returns for his third Mosaic appearance this season to discuss the business block's history and significant challenges ahead. Randy will also detail other landmarks that have risen again, both locally and beyond. Then Barbara Tejada, Cultural Resources Supervisor for California State's Parks Angela District, will update us on the work undergoing at Will Rogers Ranch. She'll explain how the project seeks to recognize, in some way, the significance and historic context of the world-renowned property. After their presentations, our speakers will answer questions from you in the audience that will be submitted anytime during the show. You can use your Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. The program will conclude with the Conservancy's Executive Director, Caitlin Driscoll, live from the Mosaic Watch Party at the Shotgun House. Now I'd like to introduce Ken Bernstein, manager of LA's Office of Historic Resources. He will discuss the city's historic preservation policies. Ken has overseen the completion of the Survey LA, a multi-year citywide review of historic resources. He also led the creation of a comprehensive historic preservation program for the city. Ken's presentation was pre-recorded due to a scheduling conflict.
I'm very honored to be joining all of you today on behalf of LA City Planning's Office of Historic Resources. Since January, our focus in city government has been on the tremendous human cost of the fires and trying to help everyone rebuild as quickly as possible. Our hearts go out to all of you today who have been displaced and to everyone in the Palisades community, since everyone has been significantly impacted by the fires. I wanted to take the opportunity today to set the scene for the discussion in this session by giving an overview of the fire's impacts on our historic buildings and historic places within the community. In any neighborhood, it's our historic resources that anchor us, that provide us a sense of community and a sense of continuity. So when we lose our historic buildings and places, that heightens our sense of dislocation. So it's important to begin with an understanding of what we've lost, and what still remains in the Palisades community. I'll be sharing some of the assessment that our City Planning Office of Historic Resources has completed, taking stock of what architecturally, historically, and culturally significant places we've lost, and what was spared by January's Palisades fire. Given a fire that burned through over 20,000 acres, the destruction was simply staggering in both physical and human terms. In the aftermath of the fire, our office collaborated with multiple government agencies and external partners to compile an assessment of the fire's impact to the community's cherished architectural and cultural legacy. We drew upon multiple data sources from CAL FIRE's damage inspection database, which assigned percentages of destruction estimates, from LA Department of Building and Safety's damage assessments, which assign yellow, red, and green tags to buildings based on the level of their safety for occupancy, as well as some field assessments conducted by our office. And we want to thank the Los Angeles Conservancy and the preservation consulting firm Architectural Resources Group, ARG, for their collaborative work in compiling much of this data. Within the large Palisades burn area, there were a total of 117 historic resources. Only 15 of those actually had formal historic designation, either as local landmarks, what we call city historic cultural monuments, or through listing on the National Register of Historic Places or California Register of Historical Resources. The other 102 had mostly been identified previously as appearing eligible for historic designation through Survey LA, the citywide historic resources survey that our office completed several years ago. Most of the Pacific Palisades community had been surveyed back in 2013. Unlike areas such as Altadena in the Eaton Fire area, which did not have a comprehensive survey of historic resources, Survey LA's information gave the Palisades a comprehensive starting point, an informational base by which we could take comprehensive stock after the fire. But let's start with the officially designated historic resources. Of the 15 designated resources, 3 of those were largely destroyed, while 2 others suffered some minimal damage and 10 were unaffected. You'll be hearing more a little later about this site, the history of the Palisades business block, which had just celebrated its centennial months before the fire. It was built in 1924 and really was the historic heart of Palisades Village, with its distinctive Churrigueresque style ornamentation on its exterior as a variant of the Spanish colonial revival style of architecture. Most of the business block, as you can see, was destroyed, but the exterior walls remain. And here are some additional views of the business block. An additional landmark that was largely, almost completely destroyed was Camp Josepho Malibu Lodge, a 110-acre site in Rustic Canyon, donated in 1940 by Anatole Josepho, which provided youth in Los Angeles with a wilderness experience a short distance from their home. The 2-story Craftsman Lodge that had been on the site featured painted murals by the artist Tess Rizal Carter. And the camp included archery and rifle ranges, cabins, a swimming pool that does apparently remain intact, and 18 campsites. Most of the camp was destroyed. You'll also be hearing more later about Will Rogers Ranch, a California State Park site listed in the National Register of Historic Places, and a majority of the structures on the ranch, including the main ranch house and stables, were destroyed, although there were some ancillary structures that were largely spared by the fire. So those are the designated resources that were largely or completely destroyed. And now to discuss some of the designated historic resources that had little damage or no damage from the fire. First, the sycamore trees on Bienvenida Avenue, a designated historic cultural monument. The collection of the trees have historic designation. At least one of the trees did catch on fire on this block, but the vast majority were largely unaffected. The Getty Villa, listed in the California Register of Historical Resources, opened in 1974. Two of the structures on the site were assessed as having some minor damage, but the majority of the structures of Getty Villa were unaffected, largely due to tremendous preparation by the staff of the Getty. While the fire was burning, we feared that it would claim much of the Palisades' important legacy as the heart of the case study architecture program initiated by John Intensa and the Arts and Architecture magazine as architectural experiments in post-World War II Los Angeles, meant to provide a new model for the design, construction, and publishing of affordable, modern, single-family homes. The case study movement, in essence, really began in the Palisades, and two preeminent case study homes, the Eames House on the left, a historic cultural monument and a National Historic Landmark, and John Intensa's own home, adjacent to the Eames House and Studio, designed by Charles Eames and Eero Saarinen, completed in 1950, were fortunately spared by the fire. And again, these are a remarkable legacy of modern architecture beginning in the Palisades and spreading out through the region, the nation, and beyond. Also, a model in the Palisades is the work of Cliff May, often called the father of the ranch house, and the Cliff May Experimental House, designed in 1952 on the left, as well as the Case Study House number 18, designed by Rodney Walker on a bluff overlooking the ocean, survived the fire. Rustic Canyon Recreation Center, built in 1923, linked to the history of the Uplifters, a group of professional and business members of the LA Athletic Club who wanted a rustic getaway away from downtown. That remains intact, as well as the adjacent Santa Monica Forestry Station, Eucalyptus Grove, part of California's first experimental forestry station. Villa Aurora, the 1927 Spanish colonial revival home that became in the 1930s and 40s an indispensable meeting place for German-speaking emigres, artistic and literary emigres fleeing World War II and Nazi Germany. On the left, and the Perry residence on the right, the 1929 Monterey Revival home. That was one of the early homes to be constructed in the Huntington Palisades development that had been originally the estate of the Huntington family. The fire burned right up to the Villa Aurora and clearly threatened the house, but fortunately these historic resources were spared. Aldersgate Lodge and Retreat Center, located at 925 Haverford, just north of the Palisades Women's Club. Most of the structure was built in 1892 originally as a private home near downtown Los Angeles and then relocated to the Palisades in 1928 to serve two groups associated with the First Methodist Episcopal Church of Los Angeles. The men's group called themselves Wee Boys, and the women's group JOC, Jesus Our Companion. And again, fortunately, these were spared. So with that overview of the impacts to the designated historic resources, local, state, and national, we now move into the breakdown of the additional 102 identified historic resources, largely identified as significant through the citywide survey, Survey LA. And as you can see from this pie chart, about as many of these identified resources were significantly destroyed, unfortunately, as those that were largely spared altogether. And I'll provide just a small sampling of some of these identified resources that were sadly lost. To begin, Palisades Elementary School from 1930, an excellent example of Spanish colonial revival school design, the intact examples on the left and the terrible destruction on the right. Pacific Palisades Community United Methodist Episcopal Church, known as the church that founded Pacific Palisades, and the church had been established by representatives of the Methodist Episcopal Church, led by Reverend Dr. Charles Scott, who came to the area in the early 1920s. Corpus Christi Catholic Church, a 1964 new formalist style design of the prominent Los Angeles firm A.C. Martin and Associates, sadly largely destroyed. And Eric Owen Moss, the postmodern and contemporary architect, Eric Owen Moss's own residence, known as the 708 House. The project was actually about a 600 square foot expansion and remodel of a 1948 modernist home designed by architect Milton Coffey originally. It was the residence of architect Eric Owen Moss and his family, and was destroyed by the fire. At the Reverend Dr. Charles Scott House, we saw the church, but his own home, two structures were documented in our assessment as having suffered more than 50% damage. And then the Chautauqua Conference Grounds. The West Coast Chautauqua was the vision of Reverend Dr. Scott, the founder of Pacific Palisades. And the West Coast Chautauqua was an outpost of the Chautauqua movement, originally from New York State, that was meant to give people living in isolated areas around the country access to art, music, culture, history, and current events. And so there was this wonderful vision to create a West Coast Chautauqua in Pacific Palisades, and most of these structures were built in 1922 and 23. Most recently, the site has been operated by the Department of Recreation and Parks as part of Temescal Gateway Park and the Temescal Canyon Conference and Retreat Center. And this suffered between 25 and 49% damage, with some structures largely spared and some destroyed. The Swarthmore Avenue Commercial Historic District, a highly cohesive mid-century neighborhood commercial district in the Palisades. One of the structures was documented as more than 50% destroyed, one with minor damage, and five with between 1 to 9%, very small amount of damage, with three other commercial structures suffering no damage in this really unique and cohesive mid-century block. And then the Self-Realization Fellowship Lake Shrine opened in 1950 with lush grounds featuring a natural spring-fed lake, vibrant gardens, waterfalls, and memorials honoring major world religions. It sustained between 10 and 24% damage, in great part because of heroic efforts of a number of individuals who fought the fire on site. The Bel Air Bay Club, 1927-28 country club developed by Alfonso Bell, notable work of architects Elmer Gray and Mark Daniels, suffered between 10 and 24% damage to the entirety of the club. And many of you are aware of the damage to Palisades High School, the mid-century modern campus that is very much part of the heart of this community and its educational legacy. 6 of the structures were documented as more than 50% destroyed, one that suffered minor damage. 28 other buildings, however, did suffer no damage at all. So the damage was concentrated to portions of the campus. Also suffering a small amount of damage were some very significant homes. One, a Spanish colonial revival home on the left, designed by African-American architect Paul Revere Williams, as well as on the right, a mid-century modern residential design of architect Ray Cappy. And then just very briefly, a sampling of about 37 identified historic properties with no damage. Case study house number 20A, designed by Richard Neutra, on the left, 1946 to 1948, and a Huntington Palisades Spanish Colonial Revival speculative home from 1929, designed by F. Pierpont Davis and Walter F. Davis. As well as, fortunately being spared, the Henry Miller residence, where the noted writer lived from 1963 until his death in 1980, and the Lewis Brown residence on the right. So that is a small sampling of the impacts to historic resources. We are making available all of the information I've shared today and much more on our citywide inventory of historic resources called Historic Places LA, found online at historicplacesla.org or historicplacesla.lacity.org. In the aftermath of the fire, we created a special featured search to aggregate all this information and make it easily accessible to users in the community. This shows where you can select the featured search on Historic Places LA amidst some of the other searches that are available. on the site. You have the option to view the Palisades data in different ways, including a map view that you can zoom in and out on to focus on a particular neighborhood or perhaps your own street to find the records of historic resources in a specific geographic area. And then you can open a property record for any of the identified or designated historic resources within the Palisades. What we've done is we've kept the original survey or historic documentation within the property record, as well as the original photo from the time of the survey or historic designation. And then we've added the fire damage assessment with photos that were taken in January and February of this year, really creating a before and after documentation of each and every historic resource in the Palisades community. Finally, I want to share a few thoughts about how this assessment of what's been lost and saved within the Palisades area might help address some of the community's collective challenges moving forward. First, by identifying the relatively small subset of historic resources that were partially destroyed yet partially intact, we hope this information might spark a collective community conversation about how we might best preserve what remains of these sites while we envision the future of the Palisades. As I mentioned in my introduction, history and historic architecture in any community anchors us and conveys a sense of community and a sense of place. So there are some unique opportunities about how the communities rebuilding might best bridge the Palisades past, its present, including the story of the fire itself, and its future. Second, while one might think that the buildings that you saw that were spared from physical destruction now have their futures secured, it's important to realize that even these sites are not without their unique challenges. There may be ongoing issues with environmental contamination, which might trigger significant delays or additional costs before some of these buildings can be re-inhabited. And in many cases, the historic building's usefulness or continued vitality really depends upon the accompanying return of neighboring properties or neighborhood services altogether. And finally, we hope that this baseline information we're sharing on the Palisades' rich historic and architectural and cultural legacy might help serve as a guidepost for the community's reconstruction, both in informing collective decisions that may be made moving forward, as well as informing the individual decisions of thousands of property owners, all of which will ultimately lead to the reconstruction of this very special and historic community. Thank you very much.
And now we're going to move on to Randy Young and the business block. He's going to focus on the history and complex recovery of the business block. A longtime resident of Pacific Palisades, Randy has an uninterrupted record of community activism. His service includes chairman of the Community Council, chairman of the Will Rogers Cooperative Association, and president of the Palisades Historical Society. He has published or co-authored various books on Pacific Palisades and the wider area. Welcome, Randy.
Thank you very much for having me on for the third time. I want to thank Steve Loper, Libby Motika, Adina Bernheimer, especially because she's the technical. And so I want to also thank Director Haitwin Driscoll for having us and the Historical Society. So I'm going to go on with start my slideshow now. This is Dr. Scott. Our community can trace its actual design and legacy to this one man. He was a Methodist minister, very well read, and very much a part of the Chautauqua movement, which is an education movement that came from the 1880s all the way until actually now. The Chautauqua movement still lives in several states. And so he was very important. He wanted to make a community that was based in the ideals of the Chautauqua. And so he had this idea to build a community. Next slide. This was his idea. A renderer by the name of Mitchell put it together in 1921. And so what it is, it's this idealized view of what a Chautauqua community could be on the bluffs in Pacific Palisades. And so what you're looking up is an idealized view of Villa de la Paz looking toward Peace Hill. And if you notice, the commercial district is closer to that big monument there. That's at the corner of Sunset and Villa de la Paz. That area was 5 blocks that were to be a commercial area. And they were supposed to be very classical type structures. And so this ideal was what drove the Palisades. And 2 architectural firms were hired. One was Clarence Day, and the other was a very well-known design group, the Olmsteds, who developed parks and communities. Next slide. The man who actually, though, brought the money together, he's not the dreamer, he's the money man, is Robert Gillis. And this is Robert Gillis in front of the Santa Monica Land and Water Company building. That's our historic structure we're going to be talking about. And he's the guy who brought the money in and brought the idea on how they could make money to be able to float a huge amount of money to build a community. Next slide. This picture is, we know almost the exact date, which is it's Easter sunrise service, 1922. And there's nothing built. The roads went in first. In fact, the very first thing to go in is Villa de la Paz. So you can see this huge crowd, no houses at all, no buildings. In fact, where that little dust cloud is going to the left is going to be our next image. Next image. There we go. This is about a year later, and you can see how the community is starting to build. They're bringing in telephone poles with power lines, and you can see a building being built to the left. That is, this shot, as I say, is about early 1924. Next slide. And so this was going to be the commercial area. This is going to be the center of the town. And so you notice how arches were very important to the structure. There were classical ideals on architecture were very, very important. Next slide. And as you can see, they had a Corinthian column type, decorations in it to press that classicism. Now, this building is called Spanish Colonial Revival. It was a California idea of classical architecture. Next image. This is opening day, November 1924. And so you can see that even though there are probably only about 50 people living in town, everybody came. They already had a band going, and it was a very big event. To the lower right, you'll see a little stake in the ground. That's marking out Sunset. Sunset Boulevard hadn't been built. In fact, it was going to be first iteration was Beverly Boulevard. Next image. They even had the Boy Scouts, and they had a flag raising, and they opened up the community market. Next image. This is looking down. You can see how much green space there was around the structure. This corner now has the vault of the Bank of America was put into that corner. But almost they a lot of the green areas that were dictated by the original Olmsted plan, they kept on being more and more space for pedestrians and cars and less space for plants. Next image. In fact, you can see this is looking down Antioch toward Via de la Paz. You can see how many trees there were all around this. This must have been quite a beautiful kind of landscape around this magical structure. Next image. And so also across the way where the village green is now, and this is going to be part of our story here, was a beautiful green area and lawn. And you can kind of see how they brought in the buses and everything. This shot's about 1925. Next image. And you can see that the growth and all the plants went right up to the structure. By the way, there was a drugstore to the far right, and one of the inhabitants during the early 1930s was Raymond Chandler, and he wrote several murder mysteries kind of attached to this building. It was really the only thing out in the middle of no place. Next image. So as you can see, this is a real estate development. I mean, they were trying to sell lots. And so they had a Pacific Palisades bus in Santa Monica that would take prospective buyers, usually from the East Coast who just came from the snow. Next image. And as you can see, as it modernized, it started getting more and more businesses. The California Bank was one of their big clients in this building. They put in a large bank in one corner, which then became the Bank of America. And so I love the Roadster cars out in front, and you can see the Palisades Market to the right. Next image. This picture shows how in the construction, they put in all of the details. And then when they finished, next image, this is the original Norris Hardware when it was in town. And so you can see that this had all of the mercantile operation. Everything revolved around this structure. It was the heart of the community. There is no question. This is the most important structure this town has ever had. Next image. And so it grew on and on. Things were going along until the Depression, and the Pacific Palisades Association lost power. And they had to get rid of a lot of properties. And a lot of the property they had to get rid of was around the California Bank Santa Monica Land and Water Company building. The business block went into jeopardy at this moment. Next image. So it changed. It went to Security Pacific Bank. And then if you notice, the greenery has been removed from around most of the structure. We still have the drugstore on the corner. Next image. Okay, this picture is about 1947. And this is very important. We're starting to get more and more businesses coming into the community. But if you notice, the village green there was turned into a standard gas station. That's because that was one of the parcels that was supposed to be part of the community green, was a commercial lot. And so they didn't have it protected as a park. And you can see everything is having many more like gas stations. I call it the beginning of the uglification of the Palisades. Next image. And so what happens is we started to more and more change to the structure. Next image. But this still was the center of the building. This is Troop 223, very early picture of them. It still was where everybody would gather. It was still, even the late 40s, the most important building. Next image. This picture is 1956. You can see now the town is having a sprawl, many different businesses, but also, if you notice, there's no trees any place. The developers who were coming in did not care about trees. They wanted you to see their signs, and they didn't want, that foliage to get in the way. Next image. Jurgensen's Market came in. This is about 1952, 53. So we're starting to get to a period of time where they are starting to have stores being built in other areas. And so markets would move in, and then they wouldn't last very long. Next image. This is where the business block started to really lose direction. In the late 1960s, early 1970s, because of earthquake codes and things like that, the building was suddenly, quote unquote, modernized. And you can see that they took out all the arches. They just put new stucco slab siding on the building. And it really went into huge jeopardy to the point where it was going to be demolished. And if you notice, you can see the gas station out in front. This was a bad period of time. And the town did not look very wonderful. It did not have trees. It was very ugly. So the community started to rebel. And there was a movement called Don't Maul the Palisades that started in the early 1970s to try to save everything. And so what they did, the community purchased the gas station, the standard station, and had it removed and put the park back in. But the business block was still in jeopardy. And so what happens is that Joan Graves, the wife of Peter Graves, and several others banded together, landmarked the structure, and got another developer in Topa Management. There's a whole essay about this in an earlier webinar by Bill Bruns, and it's worth seeing. Joni Graves really saved the community. She's still alive and kicking, and so I say hi to her. Next image. Okay, so this is where Topa Management came in, and they modernized the structure inside, but they restored the facade, and they put the arches back in, and they started to put green back in. And the only thing they couldn't put back in because of the earthquake standards were the finials that were on top of the very decorative elements of the Spanish colonial revival. That was still not allowed. But they saved this improvement, saved the community. They had their building back. And so next image. But here we've gone through many, many struggles to save this building, to protect it. And what happens is that, fires happen, and we're in a fire area. But I have to tell you, this still, even in its ruins, it almost looks like a Roman ruin. It has a real presence to it, even in its very decayed and destroyed look. It really has a beauty to it. And I believe that this is what I believe the developers who have it now, the real estate concern is Anderson Real Estate. And they're kind of handed a problem here. What do you do? And what I think they should, I hope they take it as a real challenge because, and you're going to see in other countries, they've had to deal with destroyed structures. And if, as my dad would always say, if handed a lemon, make a lemonade. Well, I want to show examples of taking a destroyed structure and rebuilding within it. Next image. Again, I have about 3 shots of the destruction. I assure you, when I first came into town after the fire, when I saw this structure, it was like having a best friend who had died. Next image. That's, by the way, the vault that was put in the corner for Security Bank and California Bank. Next image. Next image. Okay, in Brooklyn, they had this old factory that made sugar, Domino sugar. It was a very large, almost campus. And what happened was they were going to tear it all down, and the neighborhood said, hey, wait a minute, we love those buildings. And so they built modern structures within the old facades. And it really is quite striking. And it rejuvenated that whole part of Brooklyn. And the architects got awards, and the community really felt as if they'd rescued an important feeling from the past. And this is, to me, a great success. Next image. This is in Berlin, and it's I always forget it. The Rhine, it'll hit me in a minute. This is the legislature. And so what happens, the Bundestag, I'm terrible in German. So, but what's amazing, this building had been bombed, absolutely almost leveled. They rebuilt the structure, but they rebuilt elements within it that were very, very symbolic. And what they did is they put in a dome. Used to have a stone dome, but they put in a dome that was all glass. And it was to bring in light. By the way, it's called the Reichstag. Sorry. So next image. And this has become national pride, taking a destroyed structure and making it live in a very important and new way. Next image. But we also have examples very close in Santa Monica that are very important in the same thing. This is, for example, is an old Quonset hut that was about to be destroyed, and they were redeveloping all around it. And they decided to keep it and make it and put it as an adaptive reuse as a burger stand. I think it works really, really well. In fact, when I first saw it, this is on 1413 Michigan. No, excuse me. Yes, it is 1413. This is, no, I'll take it all back. It's Broadway and 9th. And it's gorgeous. And I think it's a beautiful reuse. Next image. The next one is the Santa Monica Nikkei Hall. It's a Japanese community center. And it was redeveloped. The building on the left is the original structure, and they built an apartment complex all around it. Well, this is an important structure for the Japanese community. So it was kept as kind of a gathering room. And this really is still cherished by the community. And by the way, this is an award for, and this adaptive reuse is being given by the Santa Monica Conservancy this November 13th. And so you can see these are cherished structures. Next image. Okay, I'm going to end by saying I really believe that we should look and urge and work with the developer, and work with the developer is somebody who's, they have to make a living out of this area. It must be commercially viable. But I think if we work with the developer, maybe we can have some idea on how to reuse this structure for the future. This is the real thing. Across the street, Crusoe has faux architecture up the yin yang, but it has 1/10 the character of this structure. And so I hope that we can urge the developer to look dynamically of reusing some part of this disaster and make it so it's a reminder of our past. Thank you very much.
I must say, Randy, that the beauty of the skeleton of the business block certainly lends itself for some creative ideas. Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we turn to Barbara Tejada, who will detail the plans for the future of Will Rogers State Park. She'll recall the frantic effort by ranch staff to save priceless artifacts as the flames approached. As Cultural Resources Program Manager, Barbara oversees historic structures and landscapes, museum collections, archaeological resources, and she acts as the district liaison with the tribes. Barbara, welcome.
Thank you so much, Libby. And thank you all, good evening, for inviting me to participate in this program. So we'll start with the slide. In this presentation, I'll be focusing on the activities at Will Rogers State Historic Park following the devastating Palisades fire, with just a brief overview of the lead up to the fire itself. Next slide. From the notification of a fire shift eastward about 3 hours after the start of the fire, museum staff on site began mobilizing supplies and marking priority objects. Maintenance staff proceeded to turn on the rooftop and hillside sprinkler systems around all the historic structures of the park. Other district staff, including myself, mobilized emergency packing supplies and headed out to the park. About 10 staff members helped pack up the priority items as best we could in about 2 hours before fire conditions changed around 5 p.m. And we had to evacuate through the back entrance due to a tree blocking the main road. As we left, flames were visible on the top of the hill. Next slide. This was the view, our last view of the park as we were exiting. Off to the right, you can see those flames. We received notification of the ranch house alarm activation at about 6:45 that evening. The losses were confirmed early the next morning. As news of the loss of the ranch house began to circulate online, we were concerned about the possibility of looting from the ruins, as there had been some reports of attempts at looting both in the Palisades and Eaton fire areas. Our cultural staff donned their personal protective equipment, PPE, and salvaged some of the distinguishable items that were visible on the surface of the ruins soon after the fire, that we thought would be vulnerable to people coming in and picking up. Next slide. The collections have been evacuated to Los Encinos State Historic Park, which we thought was well outside the fire zone. It was protected. There was space for storage. The park was fenced. Buildings were alarmed. Until the evening of January 10th, when the north flank of the Palisades fire actually flared up and evacuation warnings extended all the way to Encino. Our state parks resource advisor team, including folks from around the state, mobilized in the middle of the night. We found a large U-Haul truck in Ventura County because they were in short availability around the LA area. And we loaded up once again. You can see in the middle, we formed a line team just passing boxes and boxes from the building into the U-Haul. Fortunately, we ended up not having to actually evacuate out of the park, but it certainly got our hearts going. The photo on the right is the team, the staff that evacuated the ranch house. It consists of both the museum and cultural resources staff, as well as we have a couple environmental scientists or biologists and one interpreter. Sadly, two of these people lost their own homes as we were evacuating the Will Rogers Ranch House. Next slide. After fire containment, the State Parks Southern Service Center assisted the district in performing post-fire archaeological surveys throughout the burn area. And we started at Will Rogers State Historic Park on the hillsides above the ranch. A few historic artifacts you can see there. There's a horseshoe, as to be expected, the top of a can we found, and the middle picture is actually one of the original Division of Beaches and Parks boundary markers that were placed when the park was first acquired by State Parks from the Rogers family. Next slide. As was previously mentioned, a majority of the historic buildings were destroyed, but we did have some that were damaged. This photo shows the debris removal activities at the blacksmith shop and carpenter shop. The carpenter shop itself was destroyed, but the blacksmith shop survived, probably likely to those rooftop sprinklers kicked into action. Sadly, you can see them pulling out the carriage that was on display there, but we have salvaged it. So we'll see what happens with that. But a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers contractor performed debris removal work over the month of May and into early June. Next slide. Our cultural resources staff had to be HAZWOPER certified and wear all the PPE, including you can see the Tyvek suits and booties and gloves and respirators. District staff, as well as staff from the Cultural Resources Division in Sacramento, worked throughout the month to recover damaged museum objects and architectural samples from all of the historic buildings, such as, door hardware, window hardware, examples of there's sometimes we had actual wood material that we were able to collect. You see the photo at the top. The wooden floor of the carpenter shop, once we removed the debris, was actually completely fine and untouched. It's not original, it was restored, but still that was kind of an interesting find. Next slide. The rescued museum objects and the initial salvaged surface items were sent to the State Museum Collection Center in Sacramento for safekeeping and stabilization. The rest of the salvage objects and architectural specimens collected during debris removal have been undergoing initial housing, inventory, and photography at our district collections facility in Calabasas. The photo at the top is the local, our collections that we hold locally. The photo at the bottom is some of the post-fire salvage materials that were shipped up to Sacramento, and they're undergoing ultimate housing and photography and so forth right now. Next slide. The Army Corps contractor had notified Parks that a structural engineer determined that the third chimney of the ranch house was too hazardous to work around to be able to complete the debris removals. Parks Facilities Division staff had come down and also expressed concern about this particular chimney. We were trying to maintain as much of the original features of the ranch house as possible. We ended up consulting with the State Historic Preservation Office in Sacramento about the removal of the chimney, putting in mitigation measures to try to bring it down in one piece if possible. You can see there was the plastic sheeting was laid down, and the idea was that the chimney will be pulled down carefully on the outside of the ranch house footprint. Unfortunately, with the first light touch, the chimney just collapsed in pieces. Next slide. Our cultural staff recovered and separated the two types of brick and two types of stone that made up the chimney for potential future use at the park. There's a lot of the stones are used elsewhere in the park. In addition to the chimney, they're also used in retaining walls and various other features of the park. I think the staff were getting a little frustrated. Why are we spending all this time and heartbreaking work doing this? Because we were looking down the road to a future either reconstruction or creating something new from the remains of this chimney. Next slide. We have several rounds of arborist reviews by state parks, the Army Corps, an independent arborist hired by the Will Rogers Ranch Foundation, and to ensure that only the most damaged trees were removed from the park. Unfortunately, still nearly 300 historic trees, mostly eucalyptus varieties, were burned beyond saving. Even one of the two large oak trees in front of the ranch house that we thought would be able to survive and actually, excluded from the tree removals, ended up collapsing one day on its own. As you can see in the bottom photo there, the roots were actually quite shallow. A section of that oak was retained to potentially create a bench in the future. Next slide. This is a picture of the ranch house footprint, what survived, what we retained after the debris removals were completed. So what are the next steps? Next slide. Funding was allocated in the state budget thanks to State Senator Ben Allen, specifically for the restoration of the damaged historic guest house building that was used as a parks visitor center and offices. So you can see it there, the roof was partially burned, but thanks to that rooftop sprinkler system, it limited the complete damage to that structure. Interim stabilization has been completed. These are photos of the scaffolding being put up around the structure, and remediation for the water damage from the sprinklers that saved the building is underway. Our historic architectural on-call consultant, Janney Elster and Associates, will be preparing the design plans and specifications for restoration of the structure according to the Secretary of Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. So this structure we intend to put back the way it was. We're also coordinating with FEMA on funding to rebuild the park as far as reconstruction of other facilities and buildings. We'll be working with them going through the Section 106 process, the review under the National Historic Preservation Act. Next slide. So the original National Register of Historic Places listing for Will Rogers from 1971 was brief, which was common at that time, and not clear as it is specific to the Will Rogers home, but also refers to the larger ranch. State Parks is working with Trudy Sandmeyer at the Will Rogers Ranch Foundation and the USC Heritage Conservation Program and her intern grad student Zoe Detweiler to complete a new National Register nomination of the entirety of the Will Rogers Ranch as a historic landscape, with a focus on both Will's directed design of the property, as well as expanding that period of significance out beyond Will's death to include his wife's Betty Rogers' role in the donation of the land for a state park in Will's memory. Prior to the fire, state parks had begun to revisit our National Historic Landmark nomination that was almost completed. We had since contacted the NHL registration program through the National Park Service to inquire post-fire if this is still a possible avenue given the losses of some of the structures. We were advised to complete the National Register nomination first, but by applying this landscape perspective, and particularly Will's role in designing the landscape, might still be viable for a National Historic Landmark nomination. Next slide. In that vein, it will be really important to continue to adhere to the historic landscape management plan that was put together for the park. These are a couple images from that plan detailing dates of how the ranch developed over time. We'll be using this plan for future restoration efforts, including reestablishing fence lines, tree lines, drainage and circulation patterns. Trail repair work is ongoing. I've been talking with the folks at the Presidio Trust in San Francisco, who have had a lot of experience working with historic eucalyptus trees, for example, getting some of their feedback from their historic tree surveys and landscape vegetation management plans. We might be looking revisiting the types of eucalyptus species for the future, but all this is kind of subject to additional work. We also will likely have to do an update of the landscape plan to reflect those new conditions. Next slide. So we're getting a lot of questions. Do we rebuild the ranch house? We do have these historic American building survey drawings of the ranch house. We have 3D imagery of the historic hay barn that we had done for a restoration project for that structure. We have lots of photos and other records of the buildings in the park. We've retained as much of the ranch house footprint as possible, including the foundations, flagstone patios, retaining walls, and we were looking to stabilize the 2 remaining chimneys. Would reconstruction create a false sense of history, though? It wasn't built by Will. Do we instead build a low-key structure over the foundations to complement the ruins of the house to be used as a future museum space? Do we leave it alone with stabilization? These are all questions that we're starting to think about and consider. Next slide. In the coming weeks, the park is looking to reopen on a limited basis, with the understanding that some areas will still be off limits for safety concerns. But we feel that reopening can also provide a healing element in a way to the public, the ability to come back to a place that is changed yet familiar. So keep an eye out on our social media and website for more information about park reopening. I think there'll be some announcements coming pretty soon. Next slide. After the first of the year, a public engagement process will begin to explore the future of the park. Sadly, State Parks is becoming all too familiar with this process, from the historic losses at Big Basin State Park near Santa Cruz to the recent arson fire of the Bidwell Mansion in Chico. This will provide the opportunity for input from the public on what buildings they'd like to see reconstructed, if any, what parts of the park are most important, and perhaps most importantly, how people would like to help and support the park recovery. This will all be, of course, considered within that historic landscape context. Next slide. The story of Will Rogers is one of resilience an adaptation from a ranching cowboy born and raised in the Indian Territory of Oklahoma to become a worldwide star. The ranch was Will's place to get back to his roots, enjoy the simple life of roping and riding and spending time with family. I'm convinced that Will himself would have picked up the pieces and moved forward. And in that vein, we intend to keep Will's legacy at the forefront. Thank you so much.
Barbara, that's amazing how much State Parks has done in the last 9 months. It's quite impressive. You have an incredible staff and research possibilities. And now I'd like to turn to the few questions that have been asked to Barbara and to Randy. So let's get started on that. Barbara, did you find any evidence of indigenous occupation?
There we go. Unmute.
You-
No, not within the Will Rogers property. We actually, when we did the surveys, we did have a couple tribal representatives with us on those surveys. And I think partly it's because, you know, Will had pretty extensively changed the topography and did a lot of grading of the site and so forth. And he was kind of up on a hill, not down in the drainages. So we did not on the Will Rogers property. Topanga State Park is another story.
Thank you. Randy, does national designation cover a building even if most of it is gone? Or does it disappear when the building disappears?
There have been structures that have burned that have had to have at least a process. This is what, let's say the city puts their foot down and says it's historic. Well, I'm sure Latham Watkins or whatever firm they get is probably going to make them, you know, not. But it's a very powerful, it is a powerful thing. And as I say, structures that are even damaged, you have to at least have a review. And that's what it comes down to. I believe if the developer wants to take the building down, I think he would be successful.
I see. Thank you. Barbara, you sort of covered this, but will the trails be open soon? And are there state park employees on site?
Yes and yes. So the priority after the fire was to work on getting the trails at Will Rogers rehabbed and repaired. There was a lot of damage to them. There's actually ongoing a trail project that had been scheduled prior to the fire to correct some of the drainage issues around the Inspiration Loop Trail. So there is work ongoing on the half of that loop. And we have had, there is maintenance staff that's been on site at the park since the beginning, basically.
Thank you. Randy, the gentleman says one revenue source to support rebuilding of the Palisades business block would be to erect a multi-story parking structure, pay to park, on the former surface parking lot west of Bank of America. Its exterior architecture could mirror the business block building. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, that was actually very controversial, and that controversy may have changed because of the fire. The area where the single surface parking is now was looked at as a multi-level parking lot that you could come in off of Via de la Paz and Sunset. So this may be looked at again in the future. The reason why people opposed it was that it blocked the view of the historic structure, and it would impose itself over the structure. That may not be an issue anymore, so we'll see.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. One more question for you, Randy. you know Will's heritage very well. The house was a very personal structure, not an architectural wonder. What do you think Will would want to be done to rebuild?
Wow. Um, it's really interesting. The house was important to him to a degree, but I think the building he'd want restored as quick as possible would have been the barn.
Oh, yeah, it's
His
beautiful.
favorite building in the world was that barn. Now, mind you, it would be extremely difficult to build it, but it's much easier to build. The house was unique and incredibly complex and would be virtually impossible to do again.
Thank you.
Where's the barn? It's possible.
Barbara, this has to do with the artifacts within the house. And one particular, first of all, they want to know where they are and will they be moved, for example, to another facility like the Autry or I don't know, Will's Museum in Claremont or Oklahoma. And secondly, part two, um, there were books in the docent office that were set out to dry. Was it possible to save them?
As far as the books, I think last week they were removing things from the visitor center. I think they were going through and looking to see what was salvageable, and what had been, might have a lot of mold and damage and so forth. So I'm not sure what exactly was saved, but I know we were trying to save as much as possible from there. As far as the collections, as I mentioned, the items that the artwork primarily and a lot of Will's personal items are in storage right now in Sacramento at the State Museum Collections facility in McClellan. It's a former Air Force base, so it's like got 18-inch thick concrete walls, full, HVAC and everything's very well taken care of up there for now. We understand that there might be some interest to loan some items to the Will Rogers Memorial Museum in Claremont, Oklahoma for a future exhibit, and we, would certainly be happy to work with other institutions for loaning. But for now, we are state parks. Those items were donated as part of the ranch, so we intend to preserve and keep those. And we're hoping to bring some things back as soon as we can to, whatever gets rebuilt and so forth. So a number of the architectural items and salvage items are also still locally at our collections facility in Calabasas as well.
All right. We have a comment from Adrian Scott Fine, who is as you know, the president of the Los Angeles Conservancy. And he says the Palisades Business Block is a designated historic cultural monument. So a process is required already before any demo is allowed. Currently, a structural assessment is underway by the city as a peer review to determine stabilization measures that can be used to keep the facade intact while a plan for rebuilding comes together. Council member Park, as Tracy Park of the 11th District, and the City Office of Historic Resources is a part of this process alongside the owner. So, and I think the final question perhaps is, what can the public do to encourage the rehabilitation and adaptive reuse of the Palisades business block? Does anybody have an idea, Randy?
Yeah. I think if you put somebody out there with a table and a little sign saying, sign this to save the business block, that you'd get a conga line of people signing. I have never had so many people come up to me and say how important that structure is to the community. And so this is, I think if you get a line of reasoning, people will follow it.
Okay, thank you. Barbara, Randy, thank you very much. And wrapping up our show tonight is Conservancy's Executive Director, Caitlin Driscoll. She will update us on advocacy efforts educational initiatives, and community programs like the upcoming Preservation Awards. Welcome, Caitlin.
Hello, my name is Caitlin Driscoll, and I want to thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you for coming to When Landmarks Fall. If you don't know me, my name is Caitlin Driscoll. I'm the executive director here at the Santa Monica Conservancy, and I want to say what a wonderful program this has been. Thank you to Randy, Ken, Barbara. Your insights are welcomed. And to Steve, Libby, and Adina for producing tonight's show. You are all remarkable. And to everyone watching online and here at the Shotgun House, thank you. We're so grateful for your support of this year's Mosaic series. It's been an honor to highlight Palisadian stories. First slide, please. We hope you stay engaged with the Conservancy. If you're not already familiar, we're a heritage conservation organization. We hope we have one part of our mission is hosting programs like this one, programs where community members share stories with us. We offer our walking tours that transport you into historical narratives of Santa Monica, and we work with the community to see that Santa Monica's history is part of its future. And I'd like to invite you to our upcoming events. Next slide, please. The Preservation Awards. This is on November 13th. It's our annual celebration of owners, civic leaders, architects, contractors, and various professionals that contribute to the preservation of our architectural heritage and steward our community's history. This year, our event is held at the historic Miles Playhouse, and for the first time ever, we'll host a Taste of Santa Monica. You can try small bites from local restaurants. Please join us. It would be so great to see you all there. Next slide, please. On December 9th, we will honor the landmark Philomathian Club by unveiling a plaque for the landmarked site and hosting speakers from the Philomathian Literary, Art, and Charity Club. We'll recognize the Philomathian's consistent support of the Black community in Santa Monica at a celebration at the 18th Street Arts Center. This program is supported in part by a 150th anniversary microgrant from the City of Santa Monica. Next slide, please. Part of our role is supporting historic buildings and otherwise beloved sites in Santa Monica. A couple of weeks ago, City Council chose not to extend the exclusive negotiating agreement with RPG, a consortium developing a program for the continued use of the Civic. This will change the Civic's revitalization effort. We'll continue to monitor this progress and relay updates with our mailing list. To learn more about the Civic Auditorium, which was designed by Welton Beckett, check out our prior mosaic, Civic Memory. You can find this in the archives on our website. Next slide, please. And get involved. If any of these programs I described to you excite you, we encourage you to be more involved. We're always looking for storytellers to conduct tours, document stories. We're looking for garden volunteers to tend our native plants and more. So next slide. Become a member. If you were moved by the program today, I encourage you to consider membership at the Conservancy. You can scan the QR code here with your phone on the screen and become a member. You can give a gift membership or you can donate. This is the kickoff of our end-of-year fundraising campaign, and as a nonprofit, we depend on members and supporters like you to continue our work. We want to thank you again, and I'd like to introduce Alyssa Reed, our volunteer coordinator. She's looking forward to getting to know you. And I'd like to also note that our president, Mario Fondabernardi, is here tonight at the Shotgun House. And we want to say we're all so grateful to all our good friends, colleagues, and supporters. So thank you again from all of us to all of you.